Welcome to Anglo-Romani with Pricey. I'm Pricey and this is the series where I take a look at the Anglo-Romani paralanguage / dialect that I grew up with and use it as a lens for looking at the sort of migration and history of Romani people more generally. In today's episode I am once again looking at verbs, and after this particular video there will be at least another video on verbs coming up at some point. So the inspiration for this particular video came from last month's video where I was talking about things that could be used. I was looking particularly for names of tools and such, and one of the words that came up when I was in a conversation with my dad was a chinning cover. And a chinning cover is pretty much anything that cuts. He was using it to refer to a hedge cutter, but actually once we got into it, it could apply to a whole bunch of other sort of power tools, and I think even things like shears, for example. And so when I learned of this word, I decided to leave it out of the last video because I'd already gone over the term cover in another video I made on suffixes, and then decided to look at chin as what it was, which was a verb. And as you've probably worked out already, chin means cut. And this one has one of those really simple lineages, those really simple etymologies, where chin goes back to the continental Romani chinel, and then that in turn can be traced back very quickly to the Sanskrit chinna, all of which mean cut. Among Romani people across most of Europe, including the British Isles, there is a more commonly used word for sleep other than Sutti, but in my family that word literally means fuck. So in my family we use Sutti instead. What I will say is that Sutti on its own isn't really used all that much in my experience, and I've heard Suttian used a lot more. So that's for sleeping, the kind of ing form, the continuous tense. That is the one I mostly hear. If you're saying that you're going to go to sleep, then you wouldn't say that. You'd say I'm belling the woodruss, I'm going to bed. I'll talk about woodruss in a future video, but for now, just know that Suttian is kind of like my experience of saying someone sleeping. Despite being the lesser used word for sleep among Romani people of Britain today, Sutti has a very straightforward origin, going straight back to Sanskrit, supta. And this has cognates across many Indian languages today, including Sindhi, Hindi, Pali, and Kannada. So this is a word that I don't think I had much experience of growing up, but when I saw it in the Anglo-Romani project, it rang enough of a bell that I wanted to ask my dad about it. And when I did, and he started talking about this particular word, peev, it was mostly used as a noun. So you'd say I'm belling for a peev, I'm going for a drink. But there were a couple of instances where it was used as a verb, which is how I've seen it used in pretty much every other sort of written form, like in books and such. That just shows once again how flexible the Romani language is just generally, where nouns and verbs become very interchangeable. And funnily enough, this is actually a word that I kind of went over already in my video. I think it was food 1, when I was talking about mangri, and I was talking about mangri turning out to mean a suffix, and it was put on the end of pimangri, and pi was the word for drink. And in that video I had said that it either came from pino, which was Greek for drink, or it came from a very old Albanian word pi. As it turns out, I've looked into this word since and found that it actually comes from the Sanskrit word pibati, so I have to sort of correct that. If you've watched that particular video, or if you haven't yet watched that video and you're going to watch it at some point, then bear in mind pibati is actually the root word for the P part of Piemengri, or just P in general, and in this case Peev. Now as for where the V sound came from, it turns out that Peev is the conjugation for I drink, and I imagine that it just kind of morphed into the word peeve on its own. Given that Romany people have been in Europe for about 500 to 800 years, give or take, depending on whereabouts in Europe you're looking at, it is fairly common for Romany words to appear in European languages, but I've rarely come across an instance where the same word has shown up in two separate languages that are quite removed from each other in different language families. This is the case with Bikkin, meaning to sell. As I so often find is the case with verbs in this series, Bikkin can be traced back to a continental Romany root, Bikkinel, which in turn can be traced back to the Sanskrit, Vikranati, all of which means to sell. However, once it reaches Europe, like I say, this word would appear in two separate languages for pretty much the exact same thing. One being the French slang bekrav, and the other being the Swedish slang beckna, both meaning to sell something illicit, something like contraband or drugs. And following the theme of the rest of this video, Jun, or as many families say Jin, can be traced very quickly back to the Sanskrit Janita. I think that might be how it's pronounced. Feel free to tell me otherwise in the comments. And this one is really straightforward. However, it then becomes a little bit more interesting. We do see this from time to time where the Sanskrit words can often be traced back a little bit further, usually to Proto-Indo-Aryan or Proto-Indo-Iranian or Proto-Indo-European. This is one of those latter cases, and it gets traced back to a very unpronounceable word, which then gets traced back again to, I'm just going to put it on the screen, approximation sort of gwe. Remember that anytime the word proto comes up, it is kind of an estimation based on little bits of information from various languages. But this word has quite a far-reaching effect, and so there are ancestors of this word in Persian and by extension in Romany, but also in Russian, in a bunch of Slavic languages, and indeed in English. The word no itself is a very distant cousin to Jun. And with that, there are 5 more verbs from the Anglo-Romani language that are part of my personal lineage. Feel free to comment like anything that might be like a variation of this that you might have known growing up, and we can sort of compare them, because it's actually incredible how different this can be from family to family, especially when we're talking about verbs. All of them have like enough similarity that they have the same origin point, but it varies wildly in how they get pronounced in this day and age. Feel free to comment anything else that sort of came to mind through this. As I say, there will be at least another video on verbs at some point, and actually I've got probably, I don't know, another 5 or 6 of these in me at least. So yeah, still going to have Anglo-Romani videos coming out in the near future, so feel free to subscribe for more of those if you haven't already, and feel free to check out the rest of the channel for retro gaming and music discussion. I do a lot of stuff here. I'm a bit of a variety channel, and until next time, have a good one.